The Emperor has conquered Terra through the might of his imperial armies, and the Storm regiments have fought the last battle of the Greater Unification Wars in the Ural Mountains, where they met their triumphant end. Most of the nation-states on Terra have bent their knee to the Master of Mankind, but unity is still fresh, and minor pockets of rebellion fester. However, the Emperor moves forward with his plans for humanity beyond Earth. He needed a fighting force that would enable him to resolve the issues on Terra and fight its battles throughout the galaxy. These new warriors would need commanders to lead them and assist in guiding humanity into the new era across the stars. These objectives would lead to the creation of the Primarchs and the Space Marines. Hello everyone, I am Inquisitor Vaughn, and I make videos deep diving into the lore of the Warhammer 40k universe. If that's something that you're into, please like and subscribe for more content. In this video, we are going to talk about the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. On today's agenda, we're going to go over the history of how the Space Marines were created, and then we're going to go briefly over each of the Astartes legions and some of their actions which helped resolve the Unification Wars on Terra. Let's get into it. I've said it many times in previous videos that the Emperor of Mankind had planned ahead several centuries what he wanted to do and the goals he had for humanity, and one of the examples of this were his plans to create both the Primarchs and the Space Marines. Sometime during the Dark Age of technology, the Emperor, accompanied by a group of Perpetuals, would take a spacecraft to the planet Molech in the Ultima Segmentum. He journeyed to this world because it was discovered that there was a warp gate there, a portal into the warp. He would journey into the gate, and he was granted an audience with the Chaos Gods, with whom he had struck a secret bargain and gained new occult knowledge. This bargain and knowledge would enable the Emperor to create the artificial perpetuals that he wanted to make, which would lead humanity across the galaxy. Part of the secret knowledge he received was on how to invest these creations with a piece of the warp, the semblance of a soul, so that these artificial constructs possessed some degree of psychic power and influence as well. It is unknown the specific time that the Emperor embarked on this journey, but what is known is that whatever his plans were, they were interrupted or delayed by the cybernetic revolt and the coming of the Old Night. The Emperor would survive the Old Night on Terra, and with the organizational structure of the Storm Regiments, or Thunder Warriors, it was clear that the Emperor was still focused on his goals to create the Astartes and the Primarchs. His genetic experiments on the early Genos were said to have inspired him on how to create the Space Marines, as well as the physical bodies of the Primarchs. He only needed more technology and more of Terra's scientists under his control in order to make the goal a reality. Somewhere along his journeys during the early Unification Wars, the Emperor would meet another Perpetual Psyker whose name was Bram Alcador, but who would later be known as Malcador. Malcador was one of the last remaining members of the Order of Sigillites, a secretive organization that strove to preserve the greatest cultural artifacts from Terra's ancient history. The Emperor and Malcador would become strong allies, and it was actually Malcador that encouraged the Emperor to call himself the Emperor of Mankind. Malcador would tell the Emperor about the secret chamber of the Sigillites located deep underneath the Himalayan mountains, which possessed technology and artifacts that he could use to further his ambitions, and the Emperor would head there without haste. Underneath the Himalayan mountains, the Emperor would uncover the hidden technology of the Sigillites and set up his laboratories of the biotechnical division. It would be at this time that the Emperor began what would later be called his Primarch Project. By combining his genetic information with that of another Perpetual, Erda, and straining all the knowledge of bioengineering that he and his scientists could muster, the Emperor created the 21 Primarchs. these Primarchs were not the same as the Thunder Warrior Primarchs. Primarch in this instance was more than a military rank. The Primarchs that the Emperor created would basically grow into demigods of humanity. They would be bioengineered giants, made to be artificial perpetuals, invested with warp energy and warlike spirits that would make them a terror to behold. Each was designed to be a warlord and a charismatic leader of civilizations. These beings were some of the finest work of the Emperor's bioengineering, even better than the Custodes. The Emperor would grow these Primarchs to infancy in their gestation pods within the Himalayan mountains, even as the Unification Wars were still being prosecuted in the world around it. It was also around this time that the Emperor would make the mountains his permanent residence, and the construction of the Imperial Palace began. Using the genetic information from each of these Primarch projects, the Emperor would develop the Gene Seed, 19 organs that would transform a human adolescent male into a superhuman warrior once they were surgically implanted. These warriors would be named after the scientist who made them a reality, Amar Astartes. They would be called the Adeptus Astartes. According to available lore, Erda, the mother of the Primarchs, in the same way that the Emperor was the father of the Primarchs, dreaded the future that the Emperor had planned for the Primarchs, and she wished to save them from that fate. So, she opened a portal into the warp from within the laboratories of the Emperor, which scattered the Primarch gestation pods across the galaxy, and following this, she went into hiding. What's worse, Amar Astartes, who understood the importance of the Primarchs to the new class of warriors she helped to create, deemed the entire project a failure with the scattering of the Primarchs because the Astartes would need their Primarchs to be stable. In reaction to their loss, Amar attempted to destroy the Primarchs' genetic information to prevent the Emperor from making more gene seed from them. Though she was successful in destroying some of the information, the Emperor had secretly stored copies of the gene seed information elsewhere. Amar Astartes was killed in the explosion that she had caused in the laboratory. Despite losing the Primarchs and having his new warrior template threatened, the Emperor would still be able to move forward with creating the Space Marine Legions. Most of the major nation states had already submitted to the rule of the Emperor. From many of them, the Emperor would take the initial recruits to the legions. The Emperor would also recruit from the small but aggressive and generally uncivilized tribal groups on Terra that remained as well. He was very selective in the populations that he would choose for specific legion gene seed due to modifications he made to certain Primarchs that would enable them and their warriors to fight in and master specific arenas of war. Because of this, the legions were used far differently by the Emperor than they were even used by their own Primarchs, since he knew exactly what they were made for. This created a sharp difference between the Terran legions and what they would later become under their Primarchs when they were discovered. When the legions were initially deployed, they were done so in gray, unadorned Mark I armor, and they were only identified by their legion number. Over time, through their deeds, they would earn their own names from the Emperor or from the other fighting forces. In this part of the video, we're just going to go over very briefly the Terran legions and how they contributed to the resolution of the Unification Wars. The first legion of the Adeptus Astartes served as the foundation on which all of the other legions would be built. Made from recruits gathered from all across Terra who had genetic purity despite the nuclear waste of the planet, the first legion started out small, but became the largest legion during the Unification Wars. The Emperor wielded the First Legion in such a way that they faced the remaining horrors of the Old Night in order to test them. For this reason, they were entrusted with the use of devastating weapons and deployed into the most difficult conflicts that remained on Earth at the time. Their numbers, mixed with their occult traditions of gathering information on defeated enemies, guaranteed them multiple victories. They became feared across Terra and referred to as the Angels of Death. This name stuck to them, not only to the Legion, but to all Space Marines through them. They would eventually don black armor and organize themselves in ways that refer to angelic ideas like wings, hosts, and crowns. Some of the battles that the First Legion fought in on Terra included the Third Siege of Antioch, the Battle of Samarkand, and the defense of the Imperial Palace against a rebellion force of Thunder Warriors and militia. The Third Legion of Astartes saw its initial recruits taken from the children of the noble bloodlines of Europa, both the continent and the nation-state. Initially, some gave their children to the Legion as a way of penance for resisting the Emperor's rule when they realized that he would conquer. But after seeing the deeds of the other legions, the noble families of Europa and the rest of the world willingly gave their male youth to the Emperor's Third Legion with pride. Perhaps it's due to the noble bloodline of most of its legionnaires, but the Third Legion gained a reputation for perfection and the pursuit of greatness amongst the other legions. Rather than fighting battles in large groups, during the latter unification wars, the Third Legion would be distributed in small groups to support the Imperial Army, often in leadership and battle strategy roles. The battles that were supported by the Third Legion consistently met victory. It would not be during the Unification Wars that the Third Legion would be given their latter name, the Emperor's Children, but instead during the Great Crusade. As if symbolic of the future that the Emperor intended for the Legion, the Fourth Legion's initial recruits were gathered on a destroyed fortress in Sek Amrak and taken from the gun tribes and Tuk enclaves of the surrounding area. The Fourth Legion was the Emperor's siege legion. They would master and thus be utilized in drawn-out battles against resistant pockets on Terra who hid themselves behind the walls of massive structures and fortifications. The Fourth Legion would destroy these structures and slaughter the resistance efficiently. These battles were some of the deadliest and attrition-heavy on the Emperor's forces. The Fourth were a brutal legion, and due to their stable gene seed, which complemented bionics rather than rejected them, the Fourth Legion became one of the fastest-growing legions of Astartes, which was useful because its ranks faced heavy casualties in every conflict they engaged in. The Fifth Legion of Adeptus Astartes were the Scout Legion of the latter Unification Wars. Kept separate from the others and deployed in small groups of less than a dozen, the Legionnaires of the Fifth Legion were the eyes and ears of the Emperor's forces as the Unification Wars concluded. Recruited from the youth of the nomadic tribes of the frozen Tulian Waste, the Astartes of the Fifth Legion were born survivalists and merciless killers who went ahead of the Imperial Army to gather information on the enemy or otherwise cause disarray amongst their ranks, softening up the enemy for the forces that followed them. Scattered across Terra, the small units of the Fifth Legion operated for years on end with no communication, support, or reinforcement, but consistently assisted in the fall of remaining enemies hidden on Terra. The Fifth Legion was one of the earliest legions of Astartes deployed on Terra, and they even fought alongside the Thunder Warriors. This independent, isolationist, and survivalist spirit would make them ideal candidates for being the first legion to leave the Sol system during the Great Crusade. The initial recruits for the Sixth Legion were taken from all across Terra. Each recruit was individually selected rather than entire groups, with the singular requirement for induction into the Legion being extremely high levels of aggression. The Sixth Legion was one of the legions separated from the others and held back during the latter Unification Wars, largely due to the nature of their gene seed. This was one of the legions whose gene seed had been experimented on to include foreign genetic material. In their case, the Sixth Legion's gene seed held the Canis Helix, canine genetic information that would create animalistic Astartes. The combination of the high level of aggression with the canine genetic information added to their gene seed would make the legionnaires of the Sixth Legion bestial, predatory hunter-killers who could not be deployed on Terra as they were marines that echoed the genetic horrors of the Old Knight, rather than the new age that the Emperor was trying to make. Instead, during the latter Unification Wars and early Great Crusade, they were trained and disciplined by drill masters, their numbers growing slowly due to the instability of their gene seed. The Seventh Legion were warrior masons amongst the Astartes legions. Their occupation was the seizure and expansion of physical territory on Earth. They fought enemies, claimed their territory for the Emperor, and built fortresses and citadels that served as pillars of the new civilization on Terra before moving on to conquer more land. It was the 7th Legion that fought the Windcaller clans on the Himalayan mountains and built the first bastions of the Imperial Palace. Recruited from across Terra from candidates with endurance, spirits, and high pain tolerance, the 7th Legion were crusaders and were the embodiment of the Emperor's ideal for the Space Marine legions. They actually earned their name on Terra, the Imperial Fists, from the Emperor himself, and their legion would accompany the Emperor's procession on Terra as his bodyguard legion. The 8th Legion were one of the legions formed from the Albion clans initially. Its initial recruits were taken from the pale children of the subterranean prison sinks within which the criminals of Terra's old night resided, punished by the inability to see the sun's light ever again or breathe free air. These recruits were the offspring of murderers, psychopaths, and other undesirables trapped beneath Terra's surface in an interconnected prison system of madness and death. For this reason, most of the legionnaires of the 8th Legion were pale-skinned and sensitive to light, but their gene seed complemented this, giving them the ability to see in darkness far better than any other legion. The 8th Legion were the Emperor's justice and vengeance made manifest. Utilizing their inherent nature and combining that with the Astartes' physiology, the Emperor would send the 8th not to face horrors, but to be horrors. Striking at night and slaughtering his enemies, the 8th Legion would intentionally leave grisly displays of their victims as warnings to the other nation-states, both those loyal and those not. The 9th Legion's gene seed was another of the bio-experiments of the Emperor on the Astartes. By design, it was created to transform human mutants into human-looking Astartes. As such, the 9th Legion had the unique task of combating the mutated populations that prowled Terra's wastes, those unfortunate souls scarred by the nuclear fallout and atomic aftermath of the previous age, rejected by the nation-states due to their deformities. It was not only the 9th Legion's task to combat these mutants, but to incorporate them into their ranks, as no other legion could. It's through the 9th Legion that the Emperor utilized even the mutants on Terra and weaponized them toward the future of humanity. Because there was no shortage of mutants on Terra, even with the casualties the Legion would take, their numbers would be replaced quickly, which inspired Malcador to give the Legion the name the Revenant Legion, for a legion that couldn't die. Another of the Albion clan legions, the initial recruits for the 10th Legion were taken from Albia, but would later be recruited from all across Terra. It would be the 10th Legion that would inherit the Albion clan's mastery of the machine and heavy aspects of war. Known for their strict, lockstep, and remorseless discipline in war, the 10th Legion were not utilized as much on Terra as they would later be utilized during the Great Crusade. The initial recruits for the 12th Legion were selected in a similar fashion to the 6th Legion in that the desired trait for its legionnaires was a high level of aggression. The difference was that their gene seed was far more stable and standard, which enabled the 12th Legion, called the Warhounds by the Emperor, to be utilized during the latter unification wars. The 12th Legion were the embodiment of a martial legion, known for their hot-bloodedness, their aggression, and their violence. Despite this, they were a strictly disciplined force that trained for war constantly. One of its earliest battles was the liberation of Sa-Afrique, and though they had low numbers at the time, they spearheaded the attack, specializing as shock troops that overwhelmed their enemies through sheer will and aggression alone. After this initial campaign, the Emperor pulled the 12th Legion back to prepare them for the Great Crusade, where their shock assault style of war would prove more useful. The 13th Legion's initial recruits were taken from multiple locations on Terra, but shared the same background as being the children of conquered and defeated enemies who resisted the Emperor's rule during the latter unification wars. The Maglev clans of Panpakro, the Saragon Conclave, the Mid-Afrique Oligarchy, and the cannibal tribes of the Caucasus Wastes are listed as a few groups from which the recruits were taken. No records of any battles fought by this legion can be found as happening during the latter unification wars, denoting that they were a legion specifically built for the Great Crusade. The last of the 3 Albion clan legions, the initial recruits for the 14th Legion were taken from the nation-states of Old Albia. The the 14th Legion inherited their deep hatred for tyrants and oppressors from their history during the Old Knights. They were a heavy infantry legion that overwhelmed their enemies with their numbers and with their ironclad will. The Legionnaires were endurance fighters who withstood even the heaviest of enemy fire in order to achieve battlefield objectives. They often attacked during the dusk, following a long-standing Albion tradition which gave them the name Dusk Raiders by those who fought with them and against them. Though they are recorded to have fought on Terra during the latter unification wars, information on these battles are sparse. The initial recruits for the 15th Legion came from the Achaemenid Empire nation-state, one of the earliest nation-states to submit to the Emperor's rule. The student aspirants were chosen from the noble families of the Empire and taken to the Himalayan mountains for gene seed implantation. They were given the name Thousand Sons by the Emperor, partially because the first group of recruits numbered at only 1,000. As a legion, their style of combat was standard of the Astartes with no real deviations, but that would change during the Great Crusade, during which many of the Thousand Sons would develop psychic powers, becoming the only legion composed of psychically capable Marines as a standard. Amongst the earliest legions to be made, with recruits taken from the impoverished Sensation subplate and the Jutrigan Bull Hunter clans near End, or India, on Terra, the 16th Legion were an efficient shock troop legion of the Adeptus Astartes. They were the first legion referred to as the Emperor's Wolves and were known for their aggression, favoring spearhead assaults in which they were the first to attack, though they had on multiple occasions mastered the delayed approach, being unleashed from reserves to wreak havoc on the enemy. The 16th spent decades fighting under the Emperor's direct command, and this drove the Legion to increasing heights of combat competitiveness with the other legions, and though they did fight during the latter unification wars, they would take a more aggressive role during the Great Crusade. The 17th Legion was designed by the Emperor to be the most zealous and most ideological. Their task was to rid Terra of its old superstitions and supernatural beliefs, as well as those populations who were willing to resist the new Imperium over these beliefs, and to destroy the structures of old Earth that represented outdated belief systems. Indoctrinated with the Emperor's imperial truth, which rejected all things beyond the realm of science and logic, the initial recruits of the 17th Legion were taken from defeated enemy and raised up to know the trespasses of their fathers against the Emperor, which instilled them with a sense of shame and a fiery devotion to the Emperor and to the Imperium. They were known to send skull-faced warriors as messengers of the Emperor's decree to populations vulnerable to his wrath due to their backwards practices, to submit or be destroyed. Those who didn't heed the warning were soon visited by the cold and merciless legionnaires of the 17th Legion, referred to in the early days as the Imperial Heralds and the Iconoclasts. The 17th were not just warriors, but destroyers of the old world and the shadow of the old night. The 18th Legion of Astartes were one whose gene seed was isolated from the others due to the qualities it had and the Legion's intended purpose. There is much mystery around the initial recruits of the 18th Legion, and little to no information exists about where they were taken from or from what population. However, it is known that the 18th Legion's gene seed was highly resistant to the effects of extreme heat and radiation that would render gene seed organs of other legions sterile and unusable. In the few conflicts that the 18th fought on Terra, they became known to the Terran populations as the Devils in the Dark, because their gene seed permanently darkened their skin and gave them red glowing eyes that allowed them to see on the infrared scale. This effect was initiated when the legionnaires of the 18th were in an environment of extreme heat or high radiation, giving them an horrifying appearance. The most notable conflict the Legion fought during the latter unification wars on Terra was the assault on the Tempest Galleries, during which the 18th Legion launched a subterranean assault on the shield generators of an enemy, battling thinking machines in an underground hellscape that took the lives of many of their legionnaires. Despite this, the 18th disabled the generators and emerged few but victorious, commended by the Emperor of Mankind himself. The 19th Legion had its recruits taken from the Xeric tribes of the Asiatic dust fields, who were amongst the first populations slated for Astartes recruitment. Amongst the other legions, the 19th Legion were assassins and the Emperor's hidden hand, sent by the Emperor to dispatch key figures that got in the way of submission to his will. Known for their cruelty and disregard for the humanity in their enemies, the 19th Legion played a key role in the Emperor's war against the Ursh nation-state in Central Asia, during which they eliminated most of Caligan's warlords. The Legion was said to be touched by a darkness and an urge for self-sacrifice that would only increase over time. This psychological trait was a result of their gene seed, as was the pale skin and black eyes that they would develop with age. Officially speaking, the 20th Legion didn't exist until after the Great Crusade had already begun. There are no records of any conflicts that the Legion fought during the Unification Wars. Unofficially speaking, the 20th Legion was one of the earliest to be made, with its initial recruits taken from across Terra and implanted with the gene seed of the 20th Primarch. The Legionnaires of the 20th Legion were infiltrators and secret operations specialists. They were so secret, in fact, that few knew they existed during the latter Unification Wars, even though many of their Legionnaires were in the formations of other legions. They were the watchful eye in plain sight, gathering information and orchestrating the subtle demise of the Emperor's enemies. They were known to cause discontent and strife, and use such conditions to strike at targets or achieve objectives. These were the 18 legions that helped the Emperor unite Terra under his rule through their mastery of specific forms of war. The records for 2 of the legions, the 2nd and the 11th legions, have been erased from Imperial record and are unknown. With Terra under his control, the Emperor looked to the rest of the solar system with the goal of mastering it as well. This would end the Unification Wars officially and slowly begin the Emperor's Great Crusade, his task of uniting humanity amongst the stars into one empire, the Imperium of Man. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it. I love looking at the old Terran legions and seeing how they would change later on in their history. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe for more content. Also, share this video with your hobby friends as it helps the channel grow and I would appreciate it. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Phone out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.